Hello, everybody. And I see so many friends coming up here. I am really happy to see you all. Welcome to the second of a two-part conversation reflecting on the past year, considering what has been cracked open, what has been made possible, what has been laid bare, and what has this moment meant for artists and the way in which they make and share their work in this dramatically unpredictable world. 1 week ago, I also welcomed you from my winterly home here in Norway, and we were discussing the basic concept and the necessity of touring. Brian Georges from the Chocolate Factory in New York guided us through a very inspiring and, for me, mind-opening discussions. Today, Ron Berry from Fusebox Festival will follow up together with Verdensteatret, Mia Habib, Gesel Mason, and Paul Soileau. Last Thursday, Nicky Paraiso from La Mama in New York said that he thought it was so good to see all of us again. It was a long time since we have met. And he's totally right. And as I said before, and I say it again, that in these pandemic, strange and dramatically demanding times for the performing arts, I am glad and moved that we are able to keep up the Norway Now dialogue this year digitally. We meet here and now in the cyberspace. We will talk, reflect together, keeping up the good and important networking. So yes, the COVID-19 situation affects us, but for me and my good colleagues in the performing arts, Christina Fries and Guy Lindahl, the main perspective is to continue and never give up our mandate given by the artists and the Norwegian government to facilitate international dialogue and exchange within the performing arts. I warmly welcome Ron Berry from the Fusebox Festival and Verdensteatret, Mia Habib, Gesel Mason, and Paul Soileau. Before I give this digital floor to Ron, I want to express my thanks to our super producer, Lisa Reynolds, and as always, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Norwegian Consulate in New York for enthusiastic backing and support. So then, Ron, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real honor and thrill to be here, talking with you all, with these amazing artists, everyone attending. It's clearly been just a tumultuous time in the performing arts the past year, and for so many people. And so we thought it'd be interesting to check in with 4 different artists who I adore. They also, each of them work really differently. And so I thought it'd be interesting to hear from them and what they've been doing this past year, and perhaps also what they haven't been doing, and what this time has allowed for, and what has been, as part of our initial prompt, what has been cracked open, what has been laid bare. I think this moment has also just laid bare a lot of real things that people working on our field have perhaps known and been dealing with for a long time. I think the tenuousness, particularly for artists working in the US, but I imagine artists working all over, that there's a tenuous precarity to being an artist, and this moment has just made that abundantly clear. And so I think there's also been a lot of interest in thinking about our systems and how we can care for one another, how we can imagine the sharing of work in different ways, how we can perhaps imagine different payment structures to artists that's more equitable. Lots of things. Anyway, I thought we would start by, I would like for each of you to just take a few moments to introduce yourselves. We've posted some links to your websites in the chat. I encourage everyone to check out those links, get to know you. And so why don't we just go around and say a few words about yourselves, and then as you're introducing yourself, I'd be curious to begin with this initial question. What have you been doing this past year, or what have you not been doing? And what has this past year perhaps allowed to enter into your practice that was not perhaps entering before? Who would like to start? Mia, how about you? Would you kick us off? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Mia Habib, and Ron, please stop me if if I'm elaborating too much and too long.
Great.
Yeah. So I'm based in Oslo, Norway. I work as a dancer and choreographer, and yes, well, I mean, for us, we've been working on a project, which is, I would say, a kind of a research project where one of the outcomes is a performance for a black box called How to Die in Opine. And it premiered in Umeå in Sweden in the Norrland Opera last February. And then it was supposed to premiere in Norway during the Oslo International Theatre Festival at Dansens Hus, Dance House Oslo, in March. And the day of our general rehearsal, that was the day when Norway shut down. So we were kind of closed down just, before entering. And what this research project, what we had already been working on and exploring, was kind of looking at topics, cultural panic, the feeling of collapse, and ecological grief. And I remember talking about this project 2 years earlier, to co-producers, and people would say, but these are such big themes, and why do you bring all of them? And I mean, yes, they're interconnected, but shouldn't you kind of zoom in on a part of it? And we said, but I mean, it is interlinked, and we would like to see what does it mean to stand in something which is in a way too big, and how can we deal with that? And how can we look at these topics through the idea of the local, so through the idea of working and thinking together with communities. So we worked and talked with people and organizations, civic actors, the police, people dealing with, working with immigrants, architects working with volatile situations, going in and working in refugee camps or just after floods. So we're talking with all these people and kind of trying to keep a space in the research where we would kind of refrain from starting to make a piece, but rather see where it would take us, bringing in researchers and trying also to see what it meant to do these conversations, but also developing somatic practices, and going also into kind of more ritualistic spaces. So what would it mean to move and almost displace our bodies between these very different formats and in conversation with these very different people? And we had this idea to work with all of this through the idea of the unexpected. And the name of the project is How to Die Inopiné, which is the French term for unexpected. And so I thought when, our Norwegian premiere was closed down, I thought, you know what, we had it coming for this project. Kind of, we asked for it a little bit. But then I think, so during the close down or the lockdown for us, and for me, it was really this question or realizing that it was not just about shifting, and there was this moment with a lot of work for screen, and I realized I was just not there. It was just not, I think it's a bit far from my practice, and I really admire the artist that knows how to do that. But it took me time, and I realized I needed to stay inside of the project we were already engaged in, because it was so connected to what's actually happening to us now. So both for the artists in the project, we've kind of used the practices that we kind of made in this project, and we kind of used them, I think, to heal ourselves a little bit, but also been thinking about how does these practices, how can they exist and be shared with other people in this moment. So it's been a moment of going into different platforms. I've been teaching, through the theater school in Sweden, and that's an online teaching and in other platforms. And then how through an online teaching can we actually leave Zoom and go into our different localities, into our actual physical environments, working outdoors, working with the kind of leeway or the freedom of movement we have. And so it's been an interesting work of how these practices can kind of travel into other localities. So I'm going to stop to talk soon, but then for me, it was then a question of going into the next step of this project, which was originally planned to be kind of me traveling to different dance artists around the world and kind of setting off a research there for making solos in different countries that would also at some point come to Norway. And while in this lockdown, I was really wondering about how can we kind of this hyper locality we're dealing with and still stay in contact with our communities, our global communities in the art world, and how can those two be connected. So during this period, I've invited in a choreographer, Janne Camilla Lyster, who is a specialist, let's say, of scores. And we have made a score together based on How to Die and the research. And through this score, we just now a few days ago sent this score off to Sao Paulo, Brazil, to Turkey, to Soweto in South Africa, to Saxapoho in North Carolina, to Nantes in France, where the score invites these dance artists to go out and work in whatever space they want to work in. It can be outdoors, indoors, invite people from the community if it's allowed, you know, and to kind of be in a doing. So I think that's what I've been taking with me in this moment too, of how can we keep the work on the local and still connect, and also how can we be in a doing. And that's where we're using this How to Die. So we're doing a lot of like dealing with materials that we're actually allowed to touch, you know, like I can't hug a human, but I can hug a tree. I maybe cannot kiss another person, but I can, you know, kiss a branch. So we've really been going far in and kind of giving those practices to other people and had the feedback that actually sensing and being in closeness and communicating with non-human, you know, and non-animate to actually, how do you sense and connect and communicate with other materials, and that kind of opens something and gives a listening. Yeah,
that is amazing. Thank you so much. So much interesting thought going on there. I particularly am interested in this idea of connecting the hyper-local with the global and how we do those things and how we involve our bodies in that. So it's one thing to, you know, use a screen, which I also think it has been a wonderful way to connect. And it's also an amazing venue and platform, but also just not wanting to lose sight of our bodies in this moment particularly. And so I love how you're thinking about this, Mia, and the physicality and the way of sharing work across communities, perhaps without traveling physically yourself, which also speaks to, you know, concerns around our carbon footprint. I also was just interested in this interest of yours in sharing a process or a practice as opposed to necessarily an actual performance or a thing. That was really exciting. So thank you. Let's see, Gesel, could we hear from you?
Yeah, hello everybody. It's actually really wonderful to hear, Mia, what you just described, because I feel like I'm asking some similar questions, and we probably are all around the globe in different ways. There's been two projects that I've been working on. I am calling you or speaking to you all from Austin, Texas at the moment. And I teach at the University of Texas at Austin, teach dance, and also the artistic director of Gesel Mason Performance Projects. Two of the projects that were sort of happening when, you know, the world stopped. One was a project I have called No Boundaries, Dancing the Visions of Contemporary Black Choreographers. And I was in the process of turning it into a digital archive. I had learned dances from over the past 15, well, now I'm lying, it's probably more like 20 years, learning dances over the past 20 years from different Black choreographers, and my body had been the physical archive. Well, I can't keep doing it for the next 20 years, and yet I still felt like the conversation was really important and their stories were important. Part of what I was interested in doing in regards to that project was not just sharing the choreographies, but also letting folks know, who are these people? Why do they make the dances they make? Where are they coming from? How are they situated in regards to how they are reflections of what's going on in the US? But I wanted to continue that conversation. And so this question about liveness, like how do we stay in our bodies? And thinking about what the digital archive could offer, I'm thinking about access. I'm thinking about how Black and Brown and Indigenous bodies often disappear in digital space or aren't represented in digital space. And I'm also thinking about the fact that it's still choreography, that I still want to have that kinesthetic, empathetic experience. And what can we offer in regards to in the digital realm? And thinking about exactly, again, this idea of, there are some things that I realize that I don't know how to do, that some people in film are doing, and some people, you know, like, so what are the things, what are the new collaborations I need to find? And so working with people for the No Boundaries Project, thinking about how when we're on stage, using some dance for camera type work so that the videographer is also on stage, you know, what shots that you would never get when you're sitting in the audience, but all in effort to try to create that empathetic and kinesthetic experience. And then how, even as I navigate the site, like, are there ways that I'm invited to move? And so that also got me thinking about multiple spaces. I'm working, I have a dream of working with, I am planning to work with the Ransom Center. They're going to be the place that is holding this archive, but I also have a dream about having an exhibit where people are already bringing their bodies into the space, and how might they engage with some of the materials and some of these choreographies, but actually, like, maybe you have to understand this piece of choreography by laying on the floor, you know, like inviting someone to lay on the floor. There's one piece where I have chains around my ankles. What if you get to hold the chains? So even that conversation about interacting with the objects, how is it that I get to experience what the performance is like? And multiple ways of transmission. So the other thing I was working on is a project called Yes And, which is really about creating a process of undoing, of shedding, an effort to be our most creative selves. Like, who would you be and what would you do if you had nothing stopping you? If you could be your fullest self without apology or repercussion. And not about just letting go of responsibility, but it's knowing sometimes there's these spaces that get cultivated where so much creativity comes up because I'm not in my own way, or I don't have preconceived notions about how things are supposed to happen. And this rupture is actually giving us some permission. I was already rethinking ideas around performance. And one of the guiding questions for Yes And was, who would you be and what would you do if, as a Black woman, you had nothing to worry about? And that's a really interesting question during not only this viral pandemic, but also the racial reckoning that's been going on in the United States and beyond. What does it mean to actually, how does that free you up when you realize, oh, what if I don't have to spend time thinking about myself as other or in contrast to? And so I was like, what happens if we trust these new methodologies? Just really trusting our own intuition and what we already know. And maybe, we were talking about ideas of presenting and touring. I'm also working in communities, different. It's like, so what does it mean to work in community when you can't actually be physically in community? So I had an opportunity here in Austin as part of the Fusebox Festival. And luckily we have a really imaginative presenter at Texas Performing Arts who was like, we're shut down. But instead of just shutting down, was like, well, you know what we do have right now? We have space. So let's offer residencies to some local artists and have them go in the money we would pay to be touring. Let's actually give it to the local artists. So I had an opportunity to like play and make and actually get to know some local artists here in Austin. Part of the outcome of that was inviting some local visual artists to bring work into a gallery space here. And then I also interacted with those works in the gallery space and did a 5-hour movement installation that was in response to those works, in response to those questions, and ongoing conversations with this yes and community that we had created and continued. They are all over the country, all over, we meet every other week and we just check in. It's just like we're saying how nice it actually is to see people. How do we still make opportunities for connection? And we would just ask each other. It was a place where we could show up and nobody cared if you had showered or if you were still in your pajamas. We could just start talking. We could just jump into the moment. And we were asking, how are you? What do you need? And what are you doing well right now? What are you actually learning and taking away from this moment? And in those moments, we realized how much resource we had, how many ways we could support in each other. And so I took all of those questions and our conversations in that community with me into the space and basically made it a process of undoing, a 5-hour process of shedding, of talking, of dancing, of moving, and this was over the New Year's Eve period. So I was kind of thinking about how can I physically metabolize all of what has happened in 2020 and decide what do I want to hold on to and what do I want to take with me into 2021? Is there a way that I know I can't be a clean slate, but is there a way that I can like just go in and get messy and yell and scream and rest and be in peace and rave and not know the outcome? And it was a very vulnerable practice that I'm actually now trying to share with my students, as I see them also struggling to find how to be creative in this moment, how to play, how to connect. Yeah, so there are a lot of ways that things are being, in that undoing, I think that we're also trying to figure out how to take advantage of what we're learning right now.
That's awesome, Gesel. You are awesome. Thank you. I love how you're thinking about archive in terms of what does it mean to have a living archive that's also an embodied archive. How can we use it as a mechanism to share stories, share knowledge, and do so in an accessible way? It often feels like when I think of an archive, I think of something that accessible is not the word that immediately comes to mind. It's this thing that's sort of out of sight, that's removed. So that's super exciting. And then your work with Yes and just sounds so beautiful. I love that you're really exploring this idea of a process of undoing. Some interesting sort of echoes of the work that Mia's doing there. And also I love this idea of embracing a sense of not knowing as a way, as we're stepping forward, as a thing that we're bringing with us and learning from, is like actually like hanging on to this idea of not knowing. I find great meaning in that, actually. That it allows for other things to enter and allows you to have some different kind of conversations. So anyway, thank you for that. That was lovely. How about let's jump over to Verdensteatret. Can we hear from you on what you've been doing, or what you haven't been doing, or what this past year has been like for you all?
Yeah, well, as you may, everybody may know, we are an artist collective, a quite big group based in Oslo, and make works, a kind of a hybrid between concert, performance, installation, that kind of artworks. The last year, we have been producing a new piece called Trust Me Tomorrow. So we started the year to produce, and that was quite lucky, because we didn't have to cancel any touring. So we were as good as possible able to continue to work all till September, and it was a little bit better situation just then, so we managed to have premiere and play at Black Box in Oslo, and then in Stavanger, and then when we came back to Oslo, it closed down very strict. So in that sense, we were quite lucky. Maybe some of the at least I find very interesting in Trust Me Tomorrow was our work with a total black room, and in combination with the luminous objects and projected the images that you only saw for a fraction of a second. And this made a situation where it's simultaneously very sharpening all the senses, and at the same time it creates a disorientation, uncertainty of direction, size, yeah, all that kind of things, and at the same time try to over time find some trust in this total blackness. That was one of the materials that we, or situation that we worked with in this work.
It was a quite intense production period, which it always is. But in this case, we were really able to just be all of us together in the studio and work really hard for this. So, and later on, after performing it, it kind of made even more sense that the audience they were separated from each other. They couldn't touch each other, and so they were left by themselves. And I think that was kind of a strength for the performance too. That it was not just us on stage that they couldn't see or where we were going, but also the audience was.
Yeah, we were all in the same blinded. Darkness.
Yeah,
yeah, they were
and kind of blinded.
Yeah,
yeah. So working with these themes that we had of dealing with doubt and blindness and trust and delay and listening. Yeah, it wasn't planned, but it kind of came into a broader meaning afterwards.
Wow, yeah, my God, those things like speak so directly to this moment. It's like unnerving. Wow, I would love to experience that work sometime.
Yeah, we hope so too.
Yeah, it sounds so good. And let's jump over to Paul, and then we'll open it up a little bit to some other questions. But Paul, would love to hear from you, a little introduction about your work, and then what's your world been like this past year, and what have you been up to and thinking about?
Hey everybody, I'm Paul Soileau. Yeah, it's been a hell of a year, and I'm I'm an artist, I'm a performer, and I guess overall an entertainer. I dabble in music a lot, and I have a nice carousel of persona, alter egos that I like to press upon you, and virtually and physically if we're able. One persona that controls my world the most is called Christine, and it's mainly music, of a theatrical nature, very aggressive, very prone to address the state of our world in a very aggressive manner, but very kind and sweet too if you meet Christine off of a stage. I salute all of you out there who are teaching online right now. Gesel, you said you were, and I'm sure many of you are. That is one hell of a task. I kind of use Christine in a way of hopefully helping out and teaching and learning in an exchange. I do it on stage, and in virtual realms, I dabbled in those dark arts as well before the pandemic hit. But over the year, personally, it's been a much deeper understanding of my role as an artist, as a activist, and a lot of thought on my responsibility as an entertainer. I think that I found in this past year, and with dealing with those directions, I found great inspiration and peace of mind and heart when I realized that the work that I like to do is there to allow people to escape or allow people to address things that they don't normally find easy to do on their own, introduce people to new things. So I took it upon myself to understand the role that I played as an entertainer to somehow offer people online an escape, to try to make people laugh, to try to make people think about the state of the country last year and beyond and before last year. But the kind of cracking open of that rank cauldron that we kind of went through, especially last year, to try to process those things and to use these persona in a more personal way, but mainly in a way to offer other artists or just anyone out there some form of entertainment and some form of escape from their homes. And that is what I find great pleasure in doing. I also thought a lot about this past year of my creative community and just my fellow entertainers and artists and the things that we personally are going through by not being allowed to be on a stage and to tour. I find that many of us depend on the stage and the tour to process our own personal demons, thoughts. A lot of our own internal artistic circuitry depends on shows and tours and the company of other artists. As I even say this, I'm like, oh, but it's very deep for many of us. So trying to understand how to address those things personally within my community, bringing up issues of drug addiction, of loneliness, depression, compare and despair, the greatest demon of all, one of them. It's an interesting web that we're all in together. So I try to think of how work that I make as an entertainer can address those issues for people out there who understand those issues and are going through them as well. And then it's been a really, I'm very excited by and fascinated by people's means of survival, art creatively. And I've really enjoyed watching people, artists, transform and become exciting new deliverers of their work in new ways, and how we do that. I'm very fascinated by survival techniques. And one avenue I've enjoyed a lot in this time is learning more about self-production, not being so dependent upon other entities to create. We're in a realm of cameras and green screens and a bunch of bullshit that I don't know about, and usually have to pay a lot of money to have someone do for me. So being put up against the wall has been quite frustrating but rewarding, in that I've got, and many of us have built our own miniature factories within our homes. And that's very dangerous for the for the entities out there that used to support us. But at the same time, it opens a door to a very exciting way, I feel, for our creative community to exchange once we are allowed to see each other again and be in a room together again. So I'm very fascinated by what we choose to bring with us out of this dark, rank cauldron that we've been sitting in. I think personally, as artists and creative people, we have a responsibility to bring something out of this, because people who aren't, say, entertainers, creative people, people who freaking look at art for the reasons you do, are going to need fresh, new art to process what the fuck they just went through. So I think as artists and entertainers, we have a responsibility to create content so that people who are coming out of the darkness can have something to grab hold of besides an old song that I sang to them before this shit happened. So that's an exciting challenge. And I think it also brings a level of compassion to the work. And it gets, personally, it gets me out of my own freaking head, because as I said, if we're not on the road or engaging with other artists, many of us can really tear ourselves apart and become internalized and thinking about ourselves in an almost egotistical, dangerous way. And in battling that here in New York, I'm in New York City, by the way, I'm so sorry, I'm in New York. I've also enjoyed collaboration and finding out how to express my work. And as I said, primarily it's through Christine and through music and performance. So in the past year, I immediately just began to understand how I could engage with people at the level of energy and aggressiveness and activism that Christine would do. So it began of me kind of shitting out concerts from my studio and then testing the waters. And then eventually I was very happy to engage in some conversation with Leah Gangetero at Participant Gallery on Houston Street, and someone I've admired a long time. We got to talking. She was looking to explore their virtual realm. I was looking to explore my performative realm. So we were able to engage and help each other out. We did a very strange, large concert in a warehouse. We built a 10-foot tall vinyl stage, a vinyl box, and contained Christine within the box like the virus, and had the camera and tech people around the box wearing hazmat suits as scientists, very Daryl Hannah and Splash fantasy in the scientist's tank. And really explored this realm that we don't know about and explored the costs of doing things. And we're kind of shocked by costs and still went through with it and put it all together and created a really interesting show that I felt lived up to what we had intended it to. And then as an entertainer in the bar scenes and all, I've worked with several people, Kimber Fowler, people who have done their own shows, and you get to learn about different places that are working in a nice business way and financial way. And so I ended up doing a live show from Bowery Electric, which in my exploration of how to express my work in a greater way, brought a band together that I had started exploring pre-COVID last February. So bringing in other musicians, exploring the work, expanding the work. So those were two really exciting things that I was pleased with. And then just, yeah, how to exchange with people, how to relay energy, how to reach people through a screen. So that was a lot for me to explore and enjoy with the use of cameras and just smoke and mirrors basically in the virtual realm. So it's been, yeah, a lot of growth and a lot of awareness of responsibility as a creative person, and what we bring on the other end of this, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Paul. It's so interesting. I mean, when I think of Christine, I think of it as such a visceral, particularly experiencing Christine in person. It's such a visceral, tangible experience. It's interesting to think about how to, and I guess Christine has always had a relationship with the screen and with cameras and video. That's been a part of that work. So anyway, it just in this moment, it's very interesting to think about all the different ways in this moment of real isolation that we can think about connecting and collaborating in new ways. I wonder if, just to, some of you have touched on this, but I love this question that you brought up, that Gesel, you've brought up, about what do we want to bring with us forward. Paul, you mentioned a sense of responsibility, and perhaps increased sense of responsibility, but also this wanting to create content and that has meaning for people coming out of this moment of darkness. So I don't know, I'd just be curious if there's other things that you're like, yeah, this is a thing that has occurred to me that I've been thinking that would be really interesting to do more of moving forward. Maybe it's a new, newly calibrated relationship with time. Maybe the way that you're thinking about your own relationship with time is a bit different. Maybe it's just a specific relationship to darkness that you've discovered allows for certain things. Are there other things like that that have come up for you during this moment that you'd specifically like to do more of moving forward?
Oh, in fact, if I may say, I think doing more of, it would be impossible. Well, it would be a shame to see people come out of this and not do more to address their roles as being an activist or using their platform, if they choose to address. And I don't think everyone should have that responsibility. I don't think that should be a rule. There are many people that don't care to address that, and they do it in different ways, or not so direct about it. But I think it would be hard to walk out of this and not address the state of at least our country here in the United States, the state of the police state here, the state of our government here,
our entire history.
And the history of those things. Like, this shit isn't new. Yes. So hopefully it will open people's brains up to look pre-2020 that led to 2020 and understand it's not just 2020 or that damn date that cast some spell over our world.
Yeah, it's a long history. Other folks, other things that have come up for you, like, yeah, this is a thing that I'd love to do more of.
Yeah, for me, I think it's in a way something that I think I have been carrying with me for many years, but maybe now it really kind of started to reveal itself in a real way. I think there is this dance festival in Vienna, Impuls Tanz, and they have this, you know, this mentor or this program where artists from all over the world meet. And from that moment in 2006, we kind of formed a network. We named Sweden Tender Collaborations with artists from all over the world. But basically, we talked a lot about what kind of to change a bit this power relationship between the artist and the institution, and what kind of power do we have when we actually make alliances across, you know, between the artists themselves. So it's not like one artist alone knocking on this huge institutional door, but actually what do we hold together as a large community? And then we started to look at, you know, resources. So saying, you know, okay, in Norway, it's, let's say, easy in a way, or there is funding from Arts Council in a way that in many other countries does not exist. But in Norway, for example, you know, rehearsal space in the bigger cities is kind of non-existent. And then we have, you know, people in Colombia saying like they have huge studios, but actually there is no funding. And then we have other people saying, there is my body, you know. So what happens there when you start to look at resources across borders in a way? And so we used to say, if you can make space for yourself, you can always make space for another. And I think that's been guiding many of us that comes from that network, and been something I've been thinking a lot about in how we produce. So how can funding, Norwegian funding, actually trickle into other societies and into other dance artists? And even when you tour, you know, how can it be that I don't just tour, land somewhere, show my thing and go out, but actually how does something maybe stay in a way? But then so this opening space for others, which I kind of relate very much to also these, that's Paul mentioning, you know, this thing of responsibility and everything. So I think now it's been, even because there has been less kind of work in this, let's say, normal way, there has been more time for me at least to kind of really open up for my colleagues and friends, and really seeing what is the work they're really doing, what are their practices, how can we think together and talk together. So in this moment, I've kind of connected and gotten to know a lot of new people and artists also in my locality, Norwegian artists that I kind of never had, let's say in a very weird way, time to connect with. And then together we start forming alliances, and suddenly we're also able, and we have some room and space to look at structures. What are our political structures? You know, right now there's these huge changes in Arts Council Norway, which is really frightening. But actually these changes are coming at a moment where the artists have time to discuss them together and to think together. So to me, there is something about that I would like to hold on to, opening space for each other, and this kind of, how do you say, solidarity in a way, or listening or opening to each other.
That's awesome. I love it. I love this, also this interest in sort of peer-to-peer, creating these peer-to-peer networks and the sharing of resources. And then also just like, it seems like, and it's perhaps having a different kind of time right now, but a deepening of listening and looking and learning with each other, even in our own communities. That seems really, really powerful and exciting right now. While we're also interrogating the systems that we exist in and operate in. That's very exciting. Thank you. Gesel or Verdensteatret, and then after that, I think we'll open it up for a few questions to folks in the audience.
Yeah, I was thinking about in this idea of what do we hold on to and what do we let go of, what do we want to bring with us. You know, one of the in reimagining this idea of performance, just what you were saying about talking, Mia, talking across to the institutions, right? And this touring beast and model. And also, Paul, what you were saying just about this idea of it's also the way we process stuff. So it's actually like good to remember, like, oh, that's why that's happening. But this moment of, you know, you were talking about rethinking time. And that's one of the things I feel like I'm trying to hold on to. Like, I'm actually surprised at how busy I am right now. I'm like, how am I this busy? Like, I'm always saying, oh, I wish I had more time. Like right before the pandemic, I was like, boy, I just wish I had more time to stay at home. And here I am at home. So it's just, it's trying to figure out like, what am I actually asking for, right? Like, am I asking for a little bit of stillness? Am I asking for more space? And how do I make sure that I bring that into my creative practice and process? That it actually takes time for me to dive into a process and to come out of it. But often I feel like I'm on this hamster wheel of, I got to get this done in order to get that done, in order to make the tour, in order to make the project, in order to get the money, to like, it just keeps kind of going. And we have this huge pause where when I think, oh, get back to normal, like, is that really what we want to get back to? Like some of these systems were so like, like what else is there? And, you know, one of the things I was very grateful to be, you know, working with you, Ron, and with Dance Place, and also JCal up in Queens, and other presenters, just thinking about like, well, wait a minute, what if the performance isn't a one-time event? What if it's actually something that continues to grow? What if this work within the community is not as it should be, not just, great, we did it, check off, it was great to meet you, community, and we're out. So one of the things that has sort of come out of this has been, for me, has been like thinking about, where can I hold this information? Like, is there a website? Is there is that holds like, oh, here's all the videos that we made during the residency in Austin. Here are some of the processes and practices that we came up during this residency in DC. And what if they actually share across each other? So one of the things people were saying to me is, it's actually nice to know that you're not alone, that someone else is asking these same questions, but they're processing it in this totally different way. So maybe there still is some, what I've been calling like an arc of engagement, right? So there's times that are, yes, maybe it's just a talk over here, and maybe there's 3 weeks of residency, and maybe this is the thing that comes out of it. And I don't feel this pressure to be like, okay, well, where's the lights and where's the, you know, or Paul, like you were also describing, and even these things like just the idea of, oh, blind, being completely in the dark. Being like, there are some things that I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that yet. And knowing for me as an artist, I also need different kind of support. There's some things that I do that I know how to do in live spaces with people, but that description where you were talking about, oh, that's how much it costs to actually have a live stream designer so that this doesn't look like crap. Oh, you know, like these are the new systems, right? Collaborations, so that we can, reach through the screen. And so there's a way that I want to do less. There's a way that I want to do and honor the time it takes for things to evolve. There's a way that I want to challenge the produce sort of model of things. And there's a way that I want to find these new collaborations and ways of listening and ways of reaching through the screen and making those connections.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no more. Don't bring the hamster wheel forward with us if we can. But this idea of like thinking about the work as ongoing and relational, and not this thing that just happens. We did it and then we're not doing that anymore. But thinking about it as ongoing and expansive seems really exciting. Verdensteatret, any last thoughts from you about things that you would like to sort of bring with you from this moment?
I can't help thinking how lucky I am, you know, for because I think most of the things that I want to do, I'm able to do them still. And since we are quite a big group of 9 artists working together, we constantly are having this collaborative activities and discussions. So in that sense, I think we have like a very good structure for this kind of situation.
Yeah. Well, I think that what Gesel said covers most of the things I've been thinking, but well, to see some positive thing, to be closer to having this still pause, to get off this constantly producing or touring all the time, non-stop. I think it's could be healthy to have a kind of a slowdown of this frenetic activity, to have some weeks as a vagabond, walking around doing nothing, thinking of nothing special is important, I think.
And as we were discussing earlier today, that it's the first year in a very long time that we have been through all the seasons, and we have to stay through winter. We have to stay through the dark hours, and not being able to go away. So there's also, but it's also these themes that we have been working with for many years about geological time and slow processes, and how to endure time. So it's like, it's just it's other aspects coming in, or in with new experiences. But the work just still continues the way it did, you know. Like artists, we need to meet the world in the situation it's in.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I think that's beautiful that you just said that you had to experience you experienced the seasons, and that's beautiful, because most of us, wherever we live, we escape when it's bad. We go, you know, holiday, this and that. It's going to have such a profound effect upon your work, I think, to have just experienced the naturalness of nature, you know, like, I think that's beautiful. That again is something no one could have ever predicted, and that is exciting to think of what would come from that. Could I really quick address archiving too? We keep talking about archives. For a lot of us in the nightlife scenes, this has been a wonderful time because we are finally being archived. Like, a lot of performers who perform in bars and just do fucked up shit that no one ever sees are now doing it. They're creating content with video. So much work is being archived this past year with so many artists that would usually never have their work archived because they're so live. They go out there, they blast you with it, and then they're gone, which is very beautiful. But there's an immense amount of archiving going on with many artists that don't work in academic realms, that don't have people who give a shit to archive them. And so I'm very happy that there's a huge amount of archiving going on, and many people probably won't be running for any offices after this either because of that archiving.
So we're kind of up against the time here. Howard, should we wrap up? Should we take a few questions? Howard, I welcome any kind of guidance here.
I think if there's 1 or 2 questions, we can go ahead and take it for those people.
Great.
Able to stay.
Awesome. Any questions from our studio audience? It's also cool if there's not. There's a lot covered there.
I have a question.
Yes. Hi.
So I'm in New York. Thanks for having me. Grateful to hear from you all. I can't help but to notice that the artists on this panel are artists who are already at a certain place in their careers when this occurred. So I'm very curious, as someone who's not in that place, who can explore with certain of the things that you all mentioned, no students, no gigs. What are the things that you think are important for us to consider at this time, as those of you who might be passing the baton will soon be doing so? How can those of us who can really just sit here and like try to take care of our own inner selves as best we can as we witness what's going on, because we don't have an audience, an institution, etc. Like, what would you offer us moving forward?
It's a great question. Thank you. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, something that came up for me was actually something even Paul was mentioning, and I think actually all of us in some way, and something I'm telling my students. I've been asking, what is it that you're training for? What are we training for right now? When we can't be on stage, when we can't be on tour, when we can't, like, there is something that is happening. What you are seeing, experiencing now is important. And I wouldn't wait for it to get back to wherever it's going to get to. There's stuff within that. I hope that there are opportunities to write, to make, to play, to find inspiration, to embrace these moments of solitude, darkness, because of what we're saying in terms of the other side, in terms of coming out. Like, it's going to be how you process this moment, how you understand this moment, what happens in this crack. That's going to be really important in terms of how we move forward and move out of this. So trying to find and continuing to make without the prospect of an audience necessarily who will then receive or make, like, this opportunity to sort of dig into the process, into the curiosities, into whatever is coming up, in whatever ways it comes up, actually feels is something I feel like I'm encouraging my students to do, and they keep surprising me. They actually keep surprising me in terms of what they're able to find, what they're holding on to, what they're making. And you definitely don't have to be in school to be doing that.
I would like, hi Chantal, I'd like to say too that I'm a big floozy for collaboration, and I have found in the, I don't know what media realms you're on, but like I primarily communicate and deliver and receive through like Instagram. That's my platform of choice of all the horrible, wretched, crooked platforms we have to choose from, which is an entirely different meeting we should have about soon, about how artists communicate with each other and self-manage, and what platforms we choose and why, and how to get rid of them. But Chantal, I always use that platform to approach other artists. Like, I'll see someone that I admire and just write to them on there and be like, hi, what's up? I do this. And hopefully one day I'd love to fuck around and make something with you. And usually 8 times out of 10, whoever I'm writing to that I greatly admire, who I think is untouchable, writes back. And I am so excited about that kind of exchange we have now because of the situation we're in, where many artists, and I believe if you don't do this, you're going to probably drown, but many artists have lowered their drawbridges, broken some walls down, destroyed some ego, and allowed themselves to be more approachable. You can't sit in your apartment alone and continue, I don't believe, and continue to produce work, and your well will go dry unless you've got some contract signed with some beings that I don't care to know about. But I think that it's really exciting to reach out and to approach people. I did that with the band I was working with. Like, I basically saw some 20-year-old kid online, you know, playing his instrument, and I was very interested in that instrument. I was very interested in him being a queer person of color who was just like self-taught, and approached him, and next thing I knew, we were playing together in a show. Same thing I did with the saxophone player that I was looking for. So I think that just busting into people's realms and throwing those things out, if there's something that you're interested in that gives you life, that gives you inspiration, that gives you some sort of a rope to climb, or that you find you could offer that thing something that they don't yet know about, you know, that personal exchange with a lack of this selfishness and ego and me kind of entertaining culture that doesn't really hold much weight, in my opinion, it's an exciting time to do that and to just reach out and collaborate. And pretty much in my experience, most people will say hello, and then you just kind of work your magic and try to, you know, bust it up.
Thank you.
Can I jump?
Mm-hmm.
It's so, hi Chantal, great to see you. It's so great what Gesel and Paul said. So, but then I was thinking now that we're in a setting now where we have festivals and houses and institutions. So I would kind of throw maybe parts of what you're asking, Chantal, and kind of throw it over to the houses and festivals, because what I think we're all seeing now is that there is a bottleneck happening a little bit, obviously, because all these shows are canceled. So we're sitting, I mean, for me, this week, all these meetings with houses and talking rescheduling and 2022 and here and there, you know, and kind of hearing the panic growing from the houses of saying, you know, there is a certain limit to how many shows we can push in front, and then there are artists that are still, you know, producing new things. And now when you ask this question, I was really thinking, wow, okay, because I am kind of worried, you know, is there space for whatever I want to do with Dansens Hus or something like this, a black box in 2022? But then I'm thinking, what are the openings then for artists who have not kind of opened even the door, let's say, to an institution? Does it mean that they cannot enter the next 2 years because there is this whole traffic jam? So, and I was having some conversations with people yesterday that I see some institutions, and I know it does not go for, you know, I don't think your festival runs like that run, but here in Norway, I see, for example, that houses are still, after almost 1 year with the pandemic, kind of stuck in the idea that they have the spaces they have, and that they're, you know, that's what they have. And then I'm thinking, well, how can institutions and theaters maybe challenge a bit how they work and how they can open spaces now when we know that there is a big push when the opening comes, to actually open spaces for different artists, different kind of places in the career, different frameworks. And because I'm a bit worried about that aspect, actually. So maybe since those institutions and festivals are also here, that it could be an interesting question, like how to think of that in relation to Chantal's question.
Absolutely. I think just a couple things. Santi Smith in the chat was also talking about this having an interest in working intergenerationally right now, and I think that's always an exciting time to be thinking in those terms. But it feels like this is something that I'm seeing happening in a lot of different places and communities across North America that we're in conversation with, that organically right now, there's a lot of interest in working with elders and in working with folks younger. And so that feels particularly interesting right now. I also think that it's particularly interesting and important from my perspective, working at a festival or an institution right now, to really not only be looking at how do we ensure that it's not this sort of homogeneous group of artists that we keep presenting, but also how do we create a multivocal approach to programming our festivals, to curating our festivals, so that there's different folks that we're working with that have different experiences and different expertise that are helping to select what we're listening to, what we're looking at. That just, to me, in terms of thinking about what I want to move forward, it seems like a more multivocal approach to imagining festivals and presenting, and the sharing of work seems really important, as well as perhaps an intergenerational lens to that. That seems exciting to me.
I think too, yeah, we're talking about, you know, artists coming through this and what happens with the artist as we move to the next stage of this. But I'm very interested also in institutions and this idea that we've all got these shows on hold. I gave up on that contract. I'm like, that's impossible. Like, first, I think that in terms of, and Chantel, this is true with what you're asking too. It's like, you know, art addresses what the hell's going on, and things that were programmed a year and a half ago are not, many of them are not addressing what the hell is going on. So this idea that institutions are going to, you know, stay true to their programming 2 years ago and present that, I just don't find that possible, because what they present, unless there's nuggets in there that really are continuing to address and can reshape and reform. But I think the door is wide open now for artists. And like you're saying, Ron, how institutions are learning how they curate, who they curate, why they curate these people, and not relying on many times the backlog of their family actors and performers and things. Again, responsibility after what we've all kind of really been hammered with this past year. So I think there's going to be a shit ton of opportunity for many artists out there to find a place in the, let's say, academic performative realms, institutional realms, because I don't believe that things that were programmed 2 years ago, much of that is going to have significance. So the playing field is wide open.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to wrap up here, but thank you all so much for your time and your words and your thoughts. I feel inspired. I'm processing. There's a lot of stories and ideas shared. It's so wonderful. I took a lot of notes. I'm already like excited to go revisit them, but really appreciate you all being here with us and sharing a bit of yourselves and your stories with us. And let's bring the good stuff forward with us. Any last closing thoughts or comments?
Yes, I'm going to jump in here and say thank you so much to all of you, and especially to the artists for sharing their thoughts and perspective. It's been really amazing to listen to you talking. And thank you, Ron, for facilitating the conversation. It's been fantastic. So thank you so much. And we would like to invite everyone to have a look at the video that we made of new footage from Norwegian artists that has been created this year. Lisa has posted the link in the chat throughout this conversation, and it's also available on our website and Facebook page. And we would also invite you to log on back on March 2nd at the same time
This will be the last session in this series, panel discussion moderated by Lindsay Bueller-Malikel, Boomer Stacy, and Dana Martinez, in conversation with Norwegian and US artists Rimfrost and Nambi E. Kelly, Pantarei Dansteater and Blind Spot Collective, and Jo Strømgren and Santee Smith. So thank you so much for being part of this and spending this time with us tonight. Bye.
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 Bye.